Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Herald podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes. To keep in touch with us, use our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, which are all at Q and Review. That's CUEANDREVIEW, or get in touch via information@qandreview.com. That's information@CUEANDREVIEW.com. Please like and share our podcasts and give us any constructive feedback.
The Herald, Tuesday the 18th of October 2022. News. Edinburgh Modern 2 Art Gallery closes doors amid funding crisis. This article is by Ross Hunter. A modern art gallery has been forced to close its doors for the rest of the year due to a severe crisis in funding. The Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art's Modern 2 building has been shut to the public after its Director General warned last month that the institution was in financial difficulty. Speaking to the Constitution, Europe, External Affairs and Culture Committee at Holyrood in September, Sir John Layton said that the various crises facing the cultural sector would lead to a massively reduced offer. He cited the lingering impact of the COVID-19 crisis, soaring inflation and rising energy costs as reasons why the National Galleries of Scotland was struggling to keep the lights on. He told MSPs, "We face a funding challenge the like of which I've never witnessed before or imagined." Already before the events of recent months, we were looking at a pretty substantial deficit in our budget for next year, widening in the years beyond. Then, when you layer in the lingering impact of the pandemic, when you layer in the dramatic inflationary costs that we're seeing at the moment, the pressure to try and keep paying a fair wage to our staff, and of course the energy costs, which for my organisation are predicted to at least double next year from a 6-figure sum to a 7-figure sum. Then you are talking about a crisis that feels more serious and more difficult to deal with than the pandemic itself. It comes in the wake of the Edinburgh International Film Festival, the Film House and Aberdeen's Belmont Cinema closing with a loss of 102 jobs, as the cultural sector struggles in these straitened financial times. This article is by Ross Hunter. The Herald, Wednesday the 19th of October 2022. News. Overly strict parenting linked to weight gain in children. This article is by Helen McCardle. Children raised by parents who are strict and show little warmth are more likely to become overweight, according to new research. Scientists compared the body mass index over time for more than 10,500 UK children from the age of 7 through adolescence and into early adulthood. Weight was cross-referenced against 4 distinct parenting styles based on questionnaires completed by the parents and children. Alexa Seagal, one of the researchers who carried out the analysis at Imperial College London, said the link between parenting style and a child's weight is often considered a taboo subject, but could be important to informing obesity policies. The findings of the study, believed to be the first of its kind, have been peer-reviewed but are not yet submitted to a medical journal for publication. They were presented in Sydney as part of the annual International Congress on Obesity, which brings together global experts. The 4 parenting styles scrutinised were authoritative, parents who maintain clear boundaries but are also warm, Authoritarian, parents who maintain strict discipline and show little warmth. Permissive, parents who are empathetic but have few rules. And neglectful or uninvolved, parents who are emotionally uninvolved and have few rules. Weight was measured for the children at ages 7, 11, 13, 16 and 23. Researchers found that youngsters who experienced authoritarian or neglectful styles of parenting at age 7 were more likely to have a higher weight, taking into account their age, sex and height, than those who experienced authoritative parenting. They were about 1.5 kilograms, 3.3 pounds heavier on average. The association has seen this at all ages. The study's authors suggest that the lack of warmth associated with authoritarian and neglectful parenting may mean that a child's ability to self-regulate their food intake, to eat when hungry and stop eating when full, does not develop properly. Ms. Seagal said authoritarian mothers are characterised by being demanding and controlling while having low warmth and responsiveness. This could lead to them not responding to their child's hunger cues by, for example, not allowing them to select a snack when hungry and or asserting control over the child's food intake by, for example, putting them under pressure to clean their plate when they are not hungry. This control means that the child does not develop their own ability to regulate their own energy intake, meaning they might overindulge when they have the ability. Neglectful parenting, on the other hand, may be an issue of true neglect, where no rules are given, so children might have a free rein to select unhealthy options. The results also suggest that permissive parenting was associated with increased weight, although the effect lessened with age. However, further research is needed to establish whether there is a real effect, as the results are not statistically significant. Professor Louise Bohr, president of the World Obesity Federation, said, "This study highlights the fundamental importance of parents in raising healthy children. The world today often makes it difficult for children and families to eat well, be physically active, sleep well, and cope with stress. Parents who are able to set appropriate limits for their child while bringing warmth and sensitivity to the relationship may be better able to help their child be as healthy as possible." This article is by Helen McCardle. The Herald, Tuesday the 18th of October 2022. News. Professor Richard Murphy and Yes Currency Group criticise independence paper. This article is by Tom Gordon. An academic often cited by SNP politicians has trashed the Scottish Government's latest independence paper, calling it a debacle in the making and madness. Richard Murphy, Professor of Accounting Practice at Sheffield University Management School, called the document mostly puff, and it lacked any data to change people's minds, and queried whether its authors actually wanted independence at all. The Scottish Currency Group also criticised the paper as likely to undermine the government's own strategy of building a stronger and fairer economy and rejoining the EU at an early date. It said it betrayed a failure of ambition and lack of confidence and would tie the hands of future Scottish governments. It followed Nicola Sturgeon publishing the third instalment of her new prospectus for independence, Building a New Scotland, at Bute House yesterday. The 110-page paper covered broad themes on the economy, fiscal responsibility, a new Scottish currency, and rejoining the European Union. However, there was no fixed timetable for setting up a new currency, with the First Minister saying it would happen when the time is right and as soon as practicable. Despite Brexit being the material change she has used to justify IndyRef 2 since 2016, Ms Sturgeon was also unable to give a timetable for rejoining the EU, as a new Scottish currency is a necessary stage in that process. She said an independent Scotland would continue to use sterling on an informal basis until a new Scottish currency was created with a limited central bank. She acknowledged the Bank of England would continue to determine monetary policy, including interest rates for Scotland, during this period. Writing on his Tax Research UK blog, Professor Murphy said the SNP had made almost no progress on the policy of a new Scottish currency and clearly planned to use sterling for several years after a yes vote. He said that was disastrous for Scotland, as Scotland could not join the EU without using its own currency first, and its monetary policy would be determined in London, which would in turn limit fiscal policy at Holyrood. Professor Murphy, whose criticism of the annual GERS figures on Scotland's public finances has frequently been quoted by Yes supporters, including SNP MSPs, said, "Let me be blunt. Much of this document is puff. You either believe Scotland will be better off independent or you don't. There is no data in this document to persuade you of the case, so I see little point in placing much emphasis on claims to improved well-being the paper makes. Candidly, I was expecting something better than this and have not got it. If I was sceptical of the case for an independent Scotland, this paper would really not sell it to me." He said the core problem was the currency an independent Scotland would use, and the SNP appears to have made almost no progress on this issue. He said that apart from a few improvements, it was a rehash of the SNP's 2018 Sustainable Growth Commission with a few new blunders added. He said the tests set out before adopting a new currency were based on the approval of the financial markets, putting them in charge of a decision that should be Scotland's. He said overall these new tests seem to be structured to make it as hard as possible to ever get to a Scottish currency, which is exactly where the SNP was before today. This, though, is disastrous for Scotland. First, without using a Scottish currency, Scotland cannot join the EU, and a whole section of the report is dedicated to joining it, without ever mentioning the precondition that the Scottish currency must be in use first of all. Second, it is admitted that using sterling means that the monetary policy of any independent Scotland would be set in London. That means interest rates and the use of QE, quantitative easing, would be determined in London to suit its purposes. That is madness for Scotland. Third, saying that Scotland would have full control of its fiscal policy, i.e. its taxes, and the size of its deficit, makes no sense either, because monetary and fiscal policy are intimately related. Clearly, decisions on desired deficits are going to be related to interest rates, for example. If Scotland does not have control over the interest it pays as a country, it cannot control its own fiscal policy. And worse than that, if London goes berserk as it has now shown it has the capacity to do, then Scotland could not prevent the fallout for it as a result. So right now it could not stop the ruinous interest rates the Bank of England is proposing, for example. Professor Murphy also criticises a series of other elements of the paper. He concluded, "I think that this paper lays out a policy that would be disastrous for Scotland. It could even crush it. As a result, I doubt the conviction of those who wrote it about independence. Do they really want it, I wonder? It's that bad." The Scottish Currency Group, which has a number of SNP members, said there were many proposals in the prospectus to welcome, but attacked the continued use of sterling. It said, "We believe the proposal to continue to use the pound sterling for an unspecified but potentially lengthy period after independence risks leaving the newly independent country in a dangerous and exposed position. It betrays a lack of ambition, seeks unreasonably to tie the hands of the post-independence Scottish Government, and is inconsistent with achieving the aims of the Government's own wider economic strategy. During the potentially long period of using sterling, interest rates and other important aspects of monetary policy would be controlled by the Bank of England without necessary regard to Scottish interests. Any borrowing by the Scottish Government during this period would need to be in sterling, risking the creation of a high level of debt in a foreign currency. The irony is that the Scottish Government wishes an independent Scotland to emulate the performance of other small nations, but is supporting a currency plan which would tie the hands of a future government in taking measures necessary to achieve this. It would also not be possible for an independent Scotland to apply to rejoin the EU until it has its own currency. For these reasons, we strongly advise the Scottish Government to revise its position on the timing of the introduction of a new currency. The First Minister has made it clear in her foreword that the publication is not the last word on the matter and that all contributions to the debate are welcome. We believe our views are shared by the great majority of those in the Yes movement. This article is by Tom Gordon. The Herald, Wednesday the 19th of October 2022. News. Scotland flu rate higher than average for time of year. This article is by Helen McCardle. Rates of flu in Scotland remain low, but are higher than average for the time of year. Surveillance for week 41, the week ending October the 16th, officially considered week 2 of the UK's winter flu season, shows that there were 133 laboratory-confirmed cases of flu in Scotland, up from 122 in week 40. Only a fraction of cases are ever detected through laboratory testing, but this data is used to estimate the overall prevalence in the community. Current estimates put the incidence rate for influenza at 2.4 per 100,000 people. This is considered low, but compares to around 1 per 100,000 at the same time of year for the 3 years prior to the pandemic. That's 2017-18, 2018-19 and 2019-20. In each of those years, cases went on to peak between late December and early February, with flu rates reaching a high of 26 per 100,000 in 2017-18, the most recent bad flu season. It comes amid warnings that the UK could face a twindemic of COVID and flu this winter, following 2 winters with virtually no influenza at all as a result of measures such as social distancing and masking introduced to curtail the pandemic. The number of laboratory confirmed cases in Scotland during the weeks 40 and 41 at 155 in total compares to around 20 during weeks 40 and 41 last year. Influenza activity appears to be highest in Lanarkshire currently, where it increased from low to moderate, 5.1 to 14.7 per 100,000 in the most recent week. However, regional estimates can be skewed by comparatively small or large numbers compared to the population size. The report from Public Health Scotland indicates that while case numbers are higher than average for the time of year, the number of people in hospital with flu is lower than in pre-pandemic years. PHS notes that the number of influenza-related hospital admissions in Scotland has been increasing since June. By the start of the flu season in week 40, there were 54 patients in hospital who tested positive for influenza. Of these, the majority, 49, had influenza type A of an unknown subtype. This is in line with patterns already seen globally during the winter flu season in the Southern Hemisphere. The hospitalisation rate for influenza in Scotland was 1 per 100,000 in week 40, rising to 4 per 100,000 for patients aged 75 and older. PHS added the number of hospitalised patients who tested positive for influenza reported so far this season is lower than that for the 5 previous seasons prior to COVID-19 pandemic. The number of people hospitalised with influenza in the 2017-18 season peaked at more than 1,000 and at 500 in 2019-20. However, the number in hospital currently with flu is around 5 times higher than it was at the same time last year. By October the 16th, more than 870,000 eligible adults had been vaccinated against flu. This included nearly 60% of over 65s and 83% of elderly residents in care homes who were prioritised for the inoculation. Coverage is lower for other groups, ranging from just under 10% for clinically vulnerable 18 to 64-year-olds and 16% of social care workers to 36.5% of healthcare workers. The majority, 94%, of those receiving a COVID winter booster who are also eligible for a flu vaccine have received both vaccines at the same appointment. Meanwhile, the PHS report notes that in Australia, whose flu season is seen as a potential bellwether for the UK, influenza activity is now low after peaking in June. Australia experienced a steep early surge in cases from around April onwards, but the infection to mortality ratio was lower than it had been during the 2017 flu season. In the year to date, Australia's cumulative notification rate for flu nationally is 875.4 per 100,000 population. This exceeds levels seen during most of the pre-COVID years. For example, flu rates ranged between 121.8 to 422.3 per 100,000 in the years from 2011 to 2018, with the exception of 2017, which remains a record-breaking year for flu in Australia, with a total notification rate of 1,021.4 per 100,000 population. This article is by Helen McCardle.
Recorded from the Herald on the 20th of October 2022, from the sports section, recorded by Amy. Cristiano Ronaldo left out of Manchester United squad for match at Chelsea, by the Herald Sport. Erik ten Hag has led a decision to stand down Cristiano Ronaldo from Manchester United duty this weekend, PA news agency understands. Red Devils boss Ten Hag is understood to have made the call to omit Ronaldo from the squad for Saturday's Premier League trip to Chelsea. Ronaldo left the Old Trafford bench before full-time in Wednesday's 2-0 Premier League win over Tottenham. The 37-year-old cut a frustrated figure trudging down the tunnel in the 89th minute, having remained an unused substitute for the win over Spurs. Cristiano will not be part of the Manchester United squad for this Saturday's game against Chelsea, read the club's statement. The rest of the squad is fully focused on preparing for that fixture. Ten Hag responded to Ronaldo's actions straight after the match on Wednesday night, pledging to handle the situation. And the former Ajax boss appears to have moved to take command of an at best challenging situation. The PA news agency understands Ronaldo will not train with the first team group ahead of the Chelsea match. United sources have indicated the 37-year-old remains an important part of the squad, but the incident will only fuel talk of a January departure. Ronaldo was heavily linked with a move away from the Old Trafford in the summer transfer window, but no suitable option presented itself. The veteran forward has made his feelings increasingly known on his dissatisfaction with a cameo role at Old Trafford, but now United's Dutch boss is thought to have adopted a no-nonsense stance, putting the onus back on Ronaldo. That article was by the Herald Sport. Recorded from the Herald on the 19th of October 2022, from the sports section, recorded by Amy. Finn Russell left out of Scotland's squad as Jamie Ritchie takes over captaincy, by the Herald Sport. Racing 92 fly half Finn Russell has been left out of the Scotland squad for the Autumn Nations series, while Jamie Ritchie takes over the captaincy. Russell was given the summer off as Scotland toured South America alongside several other players who had featured on the British and Irish Lions tour of South Africa the previous year, but he has not been brought back into the fold by head coach Gregor Townsend for games against Australia, Fiji, New Zealand and Argentina at Breaty Murrayfield. Edinburgh's Blair Kinghorn, Adam Hastings of Gloucester and Glasgow's Ross Thompson will battle for the number 10 jersey. Russell was dropped for Kinghorn for Scotland's final Guinness Six Nations match in March after it emerged he was one of 6 players to have breached team protocol by going out drinking in Edinburgh after returning from their win in Italy the previous weekend. Then skipper Stuart Hogg was among the group, all of whom have been selected for this squad, with the exception of Russell and Sam Johnson, who suffered a broken jaw while playing for Glasgow at the weekend. Hogg was also left out of the summer tour and has been replaced as captain by Ritchie, who missed the Test series against Argentina through injury. Townsend had insisted, while naming his summer squad, that the breach of the discipline after the Italy game had no bearing on his selection and the issue had been ironed out. Russell had previously fallen out with Townsend following a similar breach of protocol ahead of the 2020 Six Nations, although the pair had repaired their relationship. Australia international Jack Dempsey had been called up after switching allegiances, while his uncapped Glasgow teammates Murphy Walker and Stafford McDowell are also included in Townsend's squad. Dempsey won 14 caps for Australia, but has been able to join the Scotland setup under recently introduced World Rugby rules that allow players to change sides following a 3-year period of international inactivity. Richie Gray has been given the chance to add to his 67 caps, the last of which came in the 2021 Six Nations. That article was by the Herald Sport. Recorded from the Herald on the 20th of October 2022, from the sports section, recorded by Amy. Hibernian vs St Johnstone set to break 33-year Easter Road home attendance record by Aidan MacDonald. Hibernian vs St Johnstone is set to break a 33-year attendance record for home fans at Easter Road. 19,500 supporters of the Edinburgh club are expected to gather in the capital in what will be the highest number of home fans at the venue since the 1-0 derby victory against Hearts in January 1989. The match is taking place on a Friday night as part of a new trial to try and tempt more people into grounds in Scotland. And it appears to have worked in this instance, as Lee Johnson's team will have significant backing for the game. Hibs chief executive Ben Kensell said, "Everyone at the club is excited for what is set to be a historic night for Hibernian FC and Scottish football." to have over 19,500 Hibs supporters inside the stadium, the largest number of home fans inside Easter Road for over 30 years, is absolutely magnificent. I'd like to thank the supporters for embracing the special ticket offering and the return of Friday night football. The Scottish Premiership fixture will also be historic for another reason, as it will be the first game in Scotland to use VAR. The technology will be a part of the top flight going forward, and Kensal has been keen to get across how excited the Edinburgh side is to be amongst the first teams to use the software in a league fixture in Scotland. Behind the scenes, we've been working incredibly hard to produce a memorable special build-up to the game that really marks the occasion, he added. With the introduction of VAR, a sold-out Easter Road, and the pre-match build-up, I hope it's a game that lives long in the memory for our supporters. That article was by Aidan MacDonald. Recorded from the Herald on the 19th of October 2022, from the sports section, recorded by Amy. Rangers to wear special jersey versus Dundee in Premier Sport Cup tie, by Ewan Payton. Rangers' home jersey will look slightly different tonight when they host Dundee at Ibrox. Giovanni Van Bronckhorst's men are in the quarter-final action in the Premier Sports Cup. The Light Blues will be aiming to join Kilmarnock in the last four of the competition. And for tonight, the club will not display their main sponsor's logo on the front of their shirts. 32 Red Online Casino have sponsored the front of Rangers shirts for several years. However, as part of Safer Gambling Week, the Ibrox club will be dropping the gambling company from their jersey this evening. 32 Red is part of the Kindred Group, whose 0% mission campaign is geared towards the goal of 0% of its revenue being generated from harmful gambling by the end of 2023. Instead of displaying 32 Red on the front of their shirts, the Rangers players will wear a top with 0% mission branding emblazoned on it. Commercial and Marketing Director James Bisgrove said, Rangers will continue to work closely with Kindred Group and provide strong partnership support to deliver on its industry-leading safer gambling initiatives and wider strategy. Replacing 32 Red, the Rangers first team will wear the 0% mission logo on the home kit for this week's Premier Sports Cup quarter-final. The first team will also promote Team Talk, a mental health initiative run in conjunction with Rangers Charity Foundation during the upcoming UEFA Champions League match against Napoli. The UK General Manager for Kindred Group, Neil Banbury, added, We are committed to implementing a new kind of sponsorship model together with the clubs and communities we support. As we enter Safer Gambling Week, it's a good time to reflect on the continued progress we have made in terms of protecting customers, as well as the improvements we continue to make through advances in our technology and processes. We are on a journey and still have further to go, but we are confident that our approach is delivering results. Safer Gambling Week runs from October 17th to October 23rd. That article was by Ewan Payton.
From the Herald Scotland, Wednesday the 19th of October 2022, from the Voices section, John Swinney, time for a different approach to the labour market. Giving people and families the security that comes from stable jobs with fair wages is central to a healthy economy and society. If the current cost of living crisis teaches us anything, it's the importance of a strong labour market. Having full control over its own future would allow Scotland to modernise the labour market to deliver improvements to paying conditions that better reflect the cost of living, as set out in our paper, Building a New Scotland, a Stronger Economy with Independence. The UK labour market has significant problems. Compared to independent European countries comparable to Scotland, it produces more income inequality, with lower average wages and lower productivity. The gender pay gap is relatively high. Too many workers are on long hours for low wages. Instead of working collaboratively with both unions and employers, successive UK governments have treated unions as the enemy, introducing the Trade Union Act 2016 to make it even more difficult for unions to organise workers. Then there are plans to introduce fees for employment tribunals and inadequate enforcement of employment standards, including the national minimum wage. So it's now time for a different approach. Proposals to modernise the labour market include setting up a Scottish Fair Play Commission to lead on a new approach to setting a national minimum wage, in consultation with employers and trade unions. A single rate minimum wage for all age groups would mean younger people would not be discriminated against. More flexible working would make it easier for parents and carers to balance their responsibilities and earn a decent living. Controlling employment law would mean we could legislate to support workers, banning the fire and hire practice of making staff redundant and re-employing them in poorer wages and conditions. More transparency and data would help to address gender, ethnicity and disability pay gaps, building on work already started by the Scottish Government. An independent Scotland would not only build a fairer working environment, but allow the Scottish Government to deal with labour market shocks the way other countries have responded to the global financial crisis and pandemic by implementing their own initiatives. For example, a scheme similar to the German Kurzarbeit programme, which provides compensation for private sector workers whose hours are reduced because of economic difficulty, could help retain skills, reduce long-term unemployment, and allow for a more rapid economic recovery. After independence, it would be possible for the Scottish Government to work with employer organisations and trade unions to design and build a labour market fit to meet the needs and aspirations of all workers and businesses. People need to make an informal choice before any referendum on independence takes place. Read the full publication at www.gov.scot/newscotland. That's www.gov.scot/NEWSOTLAND. John Swinney is Deputy First Minister. Our columns are a platform for writers to express their opinions. They do not necessarily represent the views of the Herald.
Herald Scotland recorded on Thursday 20th of October 2022. Arts and Entertainments. Harry Potter Mania Remembered as new coin is released by Gabriel Mackay, digital journalist. The Royal Mint has released a special series of coins to celebrate 25 years of the Harry Potter series, with the first novel released in 1997. First instalment, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, was released in June 26, with the Wizarding novels going on to become a cultural phenomenon. The first two coins in the collection will feature the portrait of the late Queen Elizabeth II, and the final two coins in the series will feature the official portrait of King Charles III. Written by J.K. Joanne Kathleen Rowling, the series was conceived by the author in a train from Manchester to London, which was the inspiration for the fictional platform 9 3/4 the characters depart from to attend the wizard school Hogwarts. The novels concern the titular orphan boy who discovers he possesses magical powers and is the only person who can defeat the evil Lord Voldemort, who killed his parents in cold blood. Set in an unplottable castle in Scotland, the 7 books tell the story of Harry, along with best friends Ron and Hermione, as they progress through their adolescence with all the growing pains that entails. Philosopher's Stone was written largely in Edinburgh, much of it in Nicholson's Cafe in College Street. Rowling said, "They were pretty tolerant of me, partly because one of the owners is my brother-in-law, and I used to say to them, well, you know, when it gets published, I'll try and get you loads of publicity, and it was all just a big joke. No one ever dreamt for a moment that was going to happen." The Elephant House Cafe in George IV Bridge has dubbed itself the birthplace of Harry Potter, though Rowling herself made clear that the writing began in a flat in London. However, she confirmed that she did indeed write parts of the series in the cafe. After being rejected by multiple publishers, the manuscript for Philosopher's Stone was picked up by Bloomsbury, and an £8,000 grant from the Scottish Arts Council allowed Rowling to plan the sequels. The Harry Potter series would go on to become one of the most valuable multimedia franchises in the world. Though the first book had an initial print run of just 500 copies, it soon gained traction by word of mouth, with an early review in the Herald stating, "I have yet to find a child who can put it down." By March of 1999, less than 2 years after its release, it had sold more than 300,000 copies. Its follow-up, Chamber of Secrets, went straight to number 1 in the UK bestseller list. In the same year, third book, Prisoner of Azkaban, was released. Rowling sold the film rights to the first 4 instalments to Warner Brothers for around £1 million, just as Pottermania was about to take off. Fourth instalment, Goblet of Fire, was released with an initial print run of close to 4 million, with its author travelling the country in a special train designed to look like the Hogwarts Express to sign copies for excited fans. Things were ramped up even further for Order of the Phoenix, which saw hundreds of fans queue up outside bookstores at midnight to secure their copies. It broke pre-order records and sold 5 million copies in its first 24 hours, with the final 2 books in the series selling 9 and 11 million in their first day of release respectively. Altogether, the novels have sold more than 500 million copies around the world, and the franchise as a whole is one of the most successful in history. A film series based on Rowling's books took $7.7 billion at the global box office, making household names of Daniel Radcliffe and Emma Watson. A number of video games based on Harry Potter have also achieved commercial success, and a new game based on the series, Hogwarts Legacy, will be released in February next year. Rowling has produced a number of other works set in the Harry Potter universe, including stage play The Cursed Child, which has run in London's West End since 2016. A spin-off film series, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, based on a magi-zoological textbook in the novels, has had 3 entries so far to mixed reviews. Pottermania has even extended to the worlds of academia and sports. In 2010, Durham University offered a course focused in the world of the novels, while Quidditch, the sport of the wizarding world, played in broomsticks, has several official leagues around the world. By Gabriel Mackay. Herald Scotland recorded on Friday 21st of October 2022. Arts and Entertainments. Marty Pellow to perform Popped In Sold Out in Glasgow. By Caroline Wilson, Senior Reporter. It was recorded in Memphis, Tennessee, and established the band as one of Scotland's greatest commercial successes. Popped In Sold Out was released by Wet 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 in September 1987 and went on to sell millions of copies worldwide, with hits including Sweet Little Mystery and Wishing I Was Lucky, ensuring it earned its place in most teenage girls' record collections. Now, in news that will delight fans in almost 40 years since it was launched, the band's frontman Marty Pellow is to perform the entire album for a one-off homecoming gig in Glasgow. The Clydebank-born singer will play the SEC Armadillo with the RSNO on March 26 next year. The singer said he was excited to perform the album in such a special way with a live orchestra. A spokesperson for the RSNO added, "We're really looking forward to performing with Marty Pellow for his homecoming show next year. We've long enjoyed collaborating with many different Scottish artists over the years. Concerts like this are a great chance to reach new audiences while showcasing the variety of talent that we have in Scotland." Pellow will also perform at the London Palladium on March 23 with the Royal Philharmonic Concert Orchestra, and the concert sold out the day tickets went on sale. Wet 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 was formed at Clydebank High School and took their name from the song Getting, Having, Holding from the band Scritti Politti. In 1988, the band were named Best British Newcomer at the Brit Awards. They performed their top 10 hit Wishing I Was Lucky to a televised audience of millions at Nelson Mandela's 70th birthday celebrations. The single Love Is All Around was number 1 for 15 consecutive weeks, the second longest UK chart reign of all time. The band then took the decision to delete the record from sale. It went on to spend a further 22 weeks in the top 75. Both John Martin and Van Morrison received co-writers credits for the song Sweet Little Mystery, which was the 5th single from their debut album and the second biggest success globally. It reached number 5 in the weekly UK singles chart the same year as its release. The following year, the song became an international hit, entering the top 20 in Belgium, France, Ireland, Netherlands and New Zealand. Tickets go on sale this Friday, October 21 at 9 AM at www.ticketmaster.co.uk. By Caroline Wilson.
The Herald, Friday the 21st of October 2022. News. University of Glasgow academic resigns over culture of misogyny. This article is by Caroline Wilson. A senior academic has quit his teaching post at one of Scotland's oldest universities after 35 years, claiming a culture of misogyny is flourishing within the medical school. Dr. James Going, who was made an honorary clinical associate professor at the University of Glasgow in 2016, likened its apparent failure to tackle the problem to putting a sticking plaster on a festering abscess. In a strongly worded open letter to University Principal Professor Sir Anton Muscatelli, he writes, "I no longer care to be associated with the university." The Herald revealed last month that the university launched an inquiry following complaints levelled against Professor John Paul Leach, head of undergraduate medicine and a consultant neurologist at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in Glasgow. The investigation is understood to centre on allegations of gendered bullying and discrimination involving female academics. Issues raised are said to include men taking credit for female academics' ideas and nepotism. Complaints were also made by students about a slide depicting the female brain that was shown to medical students. The university said at the time that the inquiry had not reached its conclusion. In his letter, Dr. Going, a consultant pathologist who was teaching a third-year course until last week, writes, "A culture of misogyny is flourishing in the medical school at the University of Glasgow. I and others have been waiting for evidence that people with authority in the university have the will and the backbone to do something effective about it. We are still waiting." The culture of an organisation is determined by the worst behaviour the leaders are willing to tolerate. What must we deduce about the leadership in the University of Glasgow? Surely it cannot be true that people in positions of authority in the university are more concerned to protect what they imagine to be its good name than with justice. He goes on, "Supine acquiescence is doomed to fail. An established abscess requires incision and drainage, not a sticking plaster. The BBC discovered this in painful and public manner." Dr. Going said he had the honour to teach medical and other students from 1988 as senior registrar, senior lecturer from 1991, and honorary clinical professor from 2015 until last week. He added, "I no longer care to be associated with the University of Glasgow, its College of Life Sciences, or its medical school. I am resigning in protest from the position of honorary clinical professor, which I have held for the last 7 years." A spokesperson for the University of Glasgow said Dr. Going's honorary professorship ended last year and said it condemns discrimination of any kind. In response, Dr. Going said, "They didn't remind me when it expired in 2021, but were happy for me to continue teaching unpaid in third year until last week." A slide of the female brain shown by Professor Leach to medical students led to complaints of sexism from his students. In it, a small area is labelled sex initiation gland, while driving skills and realisation of wants versus needs are shown as dots. An image depicting the brain of fictional TV character Homer Simpson was also shown to students. After the Herald published an article, Professor Leach later issued a statement on Twitter, apologising unreservedly and claimed the image had been uploaded in error. However, a former student responded, claiming the slide had in fact been used repeatedly for years in lectures. The Scottish Feminism Network said the image went beyond banter, saying it was characteristic of insidious behaviour that risked undermining the confidence of female undergraduates. In January, Morag Ross QC was appointed by the university to carry out a review of the institution's approach to addressing gender-based violence, including harassment and harmful practices that are committed disproportionately by men against women. Interviews have been carried out with staff and students. The General Medical Council's Code of Conduct for Doctors states that patients and colleagues should be treated fairly and without discrimination. Earlier this month, a damning inquiry into the Royal College of Nursing, the world's biggest nurses' union, exposed bullying, misogyny, and a sexual culture where women are at risk of alcohol and power-related exploitation. A 77-page internal report by Bruce Carr, KC, found RCN's senior leadership has been riddled with division, dysfunction, and distrust, and condemns the male-dominated governing body known as Council as not fit for purpose. RCN General Secretary and Chief Executive Pat Cullen pledged to overhaul the college following the review. A source told the Herald other institutions like the RCN are robustly tackling misogyny, yet the University of Glasgow is failing to do so despite pleas from staff and students. Why are they failing women? A spokesperson for the university said, "The University of Glasgow condemns discrimination of any kind and is committed to promoting equality and diversity across its community and campus. The university treats all complaints seriously, investigates appropriately, and addresses all recommendations arising. We do not comment on individual cases." An employment tribunal judge is considering evidence in a case involving a female academic at the University of Glasgow who claims she was passed over for a promotion in favour of a male colleague. Jeanette Findlay, an applied economist, presented data showing that as of 2020, only 11% in senior roles within her department of economics were female, with 36% in social sciences and just 16% in science and engineering. The university claims Ms. Findlay simply failed to meet the criteria for promotion in 2020. This article is by Caroline Wilson.
From the Herald Scotland, Friday the 21st of October 2022, from the sports section, Livingston Women FC changed to black shorts after player consultation over period anxiety. Report by David Irvin. Livingston Women FC have ditched their white away kit shorts and will change to black shorts following a consultation with players. The club today announced a switch from white to black shorts and a move to reduce anxiety among women playing sport during their menstrual cycle. Club chiefs had held discussions with the ladies section and players well consulted over the change to help players feel more comfortable. Players had raised concerns over wearing the white shorts when on a period, which led to the discussion and change to the playing kit. Livingston have committed to ensure any possible anxiety or worry through the kits will be fully considered going forward. Livingston WFC captain Natasha Frew said, "I think this change will allow us to focus more on our game and will reduce the anxiety among women in sport during their menstrual cycle. I think it's great that we have the backing of the club to support our change from white to black shorts. Our away all white kit is nice, but not always practical at a certain time of the month." Livingston WFC head coach Paul Giaconelli said, "It's brilliant that the club are supporting our change to black shorts. Representing the club and looking smart in the kit is really important to the team, and this change will help the ladies to focus on their game without added concerns or anxiety. As coaches, it's our responsibility to support our players to perform at their best. It's another sign of the continued integration of the women's team across the club and recognition of a progressive and inclusive culture." Livingston WFC player Erin Burns added, "Livingston offering us the option to change to black shorts from white and amber is great. It makes us feel a lot more comfortable and less anxious when playing during specific times of the month." And teammate Rebecca Giaconelli also commented, "It's great that the club are supporting us in changing to all black shorts. It's another positive step and shows how football can adapt to be more inclusive for all. This will take away the worry of having to wear lighter shorts during our time of the month and allow us to focus on football." Head of Commercial and Media Operations, Dave Black, said, "The club are more than happy to engage and take on board the feedback from the ladies section on this, and after discussions, everyone from the chairman, the board, through to the men's first team were more than happy to back the switch to black shorts for the women's team. Far be it for anyone else in the club to determine a decision like this. It's a simple solution to something that means a lot to the playing squad and the women's team, and if being able to give the green light to a switch like this and help reduce any worries, anxiety and uncomfortable feelings that were had by the team, then it can only be a good thing. Football is for everyone, and we have a duty as a club to continue to be progressive and inclusive, and hopefully this continues to show the positive steps we're taking to do that. A big thank you to our kit supplier The Soccer Shop Direct for their speedy turnaround and additional black match shorts for the ladies section too. And that report was by David Irvin. From the Herald Scotland, Friday the 21st of October 2022, from the sports section, Premier Sports Cup semi-final fixture date and times confirmed by David Irvin. The Premier Sports Cup semi-final fixtures have been confirmed for mid-January. The SPFL confirmed the matches will be held on January the 14th and 15th next year, with Celtic facing Kilmarnock and Rangers against Aberdeen. It has been confirmed Celtic and Kilmarnock will face off in the first semi-final on Saturday, January the 14th. Kick-off for the first semi-final will be at 5:30pm. Rangers and Aberdeen will then contest the second semi-final on the Sunday with a 3 o'clock kick-off time. Both matches will be shown live in Premier Sports. The final will then be held on Sunday, February the 26th. Premier Sports Cup semi-final fixtures: Celtic v Kilmarnock, Saturday, January the 14th, 5:30pm. Rangers v Aberdeen, Sunday, January the 15th, 3pm. And that report was by David Irvin. From the Herald Scotland, Friday the 21st of October 2022, from the sports section, Cricket. Scotland's T20 World Cup hopes end with loss to Zimbabwe, by Graham McPherson. Scotland's opening day victory over the West Indies felt like a distant memory as they crashed out of the T20 World Cup at the first stage. Knowing only a victory over Zimbabwe would take them into the Super 12s and matches against the sports elite, Shane Burger's men instead turned in their weakest performance of the tournament. There will be plenty to mull over now on the long journey home. If it was the bowlers who let Scotland down in a pivotal defeat to Ireland in the second match, then it was the batters who failed to step up on this occasion. George Munsey again played his part with a second half century of the week, but the pace was too slow, as the Saltires, playing at night for the first time in this tournament, couldn't get to grips with either the Zimbabwean bowling or the conditions. A spell of 64 deliveries without a boundary told the story of the innings where the ball never seemed to leave the square. When it did, it seemed to go straight into the fielders, and Zimbabwe's catching was as impressive as their bowling. A total of 132 for 6 over their 20 overs never looked like being enough. They failed to make a single maximum, and sure enough, the Africans chased down that after an early wobble when they lost 2 quick wickets. David Irvin's half-century was the cornerstone of Zimbabwe's success if they progressed through for the loss of 5 wickets. Scotland are still in with an outside chance of making next year's 50-over World Cup in India, but failing that, it will be a long 2-year wait for the next T20 tournament. From Captain Richie Berrington came the admission that his team hadn't given the best account of themselves this time on the global stage. "We came here to get through to the next phase, and it's disappointing we've not managed to do that," he said. "We came into this tournament prepared and ready for what was ahead of us. Unfortunately, we haven't quite nailed it in the last 2 games when we've needed it. Ultimately, we didn't manage to click in the night, and Zimbabwe were the better team. But as a team, the more experience and exposure we get, we're only going to get better. Moving forward, we want to try and get as many games as we can to improve." Michael Jones' half-century had been one of the few bright spots in the defeat to Ireland, but he couldn't get out of the first over here. A 4 driven down the ground had given him confidence to attack, but 2 balls later he sliced his shot into the hands of Sigitar Raza. That brought Matt Cross to the middle, but he didn't last long either, removed by a brilliant diving catch by Wesley Madaheve for just 1. That placed the emphasis on Munsey and Berrington to steady the ship, and they did that for a while before the latter got impatient and holed out in the deep for just 13 to leave Scotland 64 for 3. The Zimbabwean bowling was tight and efficient as the Scots struggled to get into any kind of momentum as the boundaries dried up. After 13 overs, they had made just 80 runs, on course for a total that was never likely to be enough, and so it proved. There was finally a bit of good fortune for Scotland when Madhaveri messed up a run out with Munsey, well short of the crease, but it was only temporary respite. The opening bat duly made his 50, but added just 4 more runs before being dismissed by another smart catch to leave the Scots in 98 for 4. Michael Lees came in and started to belatedly up the pace before a brilliant Yorker from Blessing Muzarabani ended the Aberdonians' innings on just 12. Scotland were running out of time, and another smart catch got rid of Cal McLeod, who had added 25, but at too slow a pace to be meaningful. They had to strike early in the reply to have any chance, and did so after 3 balls, with Bradfield trapping Regis Chikabwa for 4. There was added optimism when Josh Davey got Mateveri to drag on to leave Zimbabwe on 7 for 2, and there could have been a third had Scotland appealed for an LBW decision, but for some reason didn't. A third wicket did come, however, off Leake's bowling, with Wheel taking a brilliant catch low down from the deep square leg to move the score to 42 for 3. Irving made his 50, and Raza, who studied and played in Scotland earlier in his career, also looked well set before being caught behind off Davey, having added 40 to the total, before the captain also fell off Mark Watt's bowling with a 14 needed to win. For Scotland, though, it was too little too late as they bowed out with a whimper. And that report was by Graham McPherson.
The Herald, Tuesday the 25th of October 2022. News. Avanti could lose West Coast contract over drop-in services. This article is by Emma Sabiak. Avanti could lose its contract to run services on the West Coast Main Line if it fails to make significant improvements. The train operator has been given time until April the 1st to make improvements to the line that connects Glasgow to major cities such as Manchester and London after a severe reduction in services over the summer. Changes to its timetables were in response to a sharp decline in the number of available drivers. Transport Minister Kevin Foster said the 6-month extension provides a clear opportunity for Avanti to improve its services to the standard we and the public expect. But Mr Foster also signalled that the government could take over Avanti's network should it be necessary to step in following the 6-month extension. However, the SNP warned that people in Scotland are being treated as third-class citizens. SNP Transport spokesperson Gavin Newlands told MPs Scotland and the north of England have been treated as third-class citizens. I doubt the laissez-faire attitude of the DfT, Department for Transport, when it comes to industrial relations at Avanti, would last 5 minutes if home country's commuter services were being slashed in the same way. He added the 6-month extension is seen by everyone as kicking the can down the road. Mr Foster said Avanti will be fully held to account over the matter. Mr Foster added Avanti has also begun to restore services, initially focusing on the Manchester and Birmingham routes. From December, Avanti plans to operate 264 daily train services on weekdays, a significant step up from the circa 180 daily train services at present. We need train services that are reliable and resilient to modern day life. While the company has taken positive steps to get more trains moving, it must do more to deliver certainty of service to its passengers. We will hold Avanti fully to account for things in its control. However, this plan is not without risk and importantly requires trade union cooperation. The priority remains to support the restoration of services before making any long-term decision. In assessing options for a longer-term contract, the Secretary of State will consider factors including outcomes for passengers, value for money, and the delivery of major projects and investment. In this case, HS2, given the links they have with that future delivery model. But to put things simply, things must improve during this probation period for this contract to be further extended. Labour MP Cat Smith, Lancaster and Fleetwood, who secured an urgent question on the issue, asked, "When will this government stop rewarding Avanti for failure and instead strip it of its franchise and bring the West Coast Main Line back into public ownership?" Mr Foster, in his reply, said, "We are clear the current service is unacceptable and we will look for significant improvements before April if we are to look to extend this contract any further." Trains were removed from the timetable in August to cut short notice cancellations after a sharp decline in the number of drivers voluntarily working on rest days for extra pay. The Department for Transport said nearly 100 additional drivers will have entered formal service between April and December this year, meaning more services have started to be added as new drivers become available to work. This article is by Emma Sabliak.
From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 24th of October 2022. From the Voices section, Colin Borland. Time for an end to explosive economic mismanagement. Government budgets are often like a bouquet of helium balloons. When they're delivered, fresh out the box, they're all shiny and exciting and reaching for the sky. Then in the days and weeks that follow, they slowly deflate and look less impressive. The September mini-budget, however, did not so much crumple and sink, but rather did a passable impression of the Hindenburg. Whenever you seek to describe anything that's happened in the last 2.5 years as unprecedented, that animated paperclip from the 1990s should pop up saying, "It looks like you're writing in cliches. Would you like help to stop?" But it's fair to say even those of us who recall back Black Wednesday or, more recently, the banking crash, have never experienced anything like the events of the last 3 or 4 weeks. As in most of the international financial markets might seem to many just trying to get on and run their business, there's no question that the recent political and economic turmoil is having a real-world impact. Take the latest quarterly index from the Federation of Small Businesses, the fieldwork for which was carried out at the end of September as the fallout from the mini-budget intensified. That showed another significant drop in confidence, down nearly 14 points in the previous quarter to minus 45.7. For comparison, the reading was above zero at the same time last year. The figures also show that with inflation going back into double digits and hitting a 40-year high, 9 out of 10 small businesses have seen costs increase. Unsurprisingly, rises in fuel and utilities are the biggest drivers. As wider inflationary pressures bite, almost half of smaller firms expect to see revenues fall in the next quarter, with fewer than 1 in 5 looking forward to an increase. This will, in part at least, be down to shakier in consumer spending, with councils getting ready for another round of belt tightening this winter. Indeed, a survey from the BBC last week found that more than half of us expect our financial position to worsen in the next 6 months. So the figures suggest an outlook of higher costs and lower stagnant revenues. This is not a recipe for growth. The immediate challenge for the UK government is delivering some stability and breathing space for those in business. That means, for example, delivering on help with energy bills for small firms and reversing the hike in national insurance. Time is of the essence, and those savings must be in the pockets of small firms by next month, followed by clarity on what will happen to energy bills after the initial 6-month programme of support ends. At the same time, there will be opportunities in the Scottish Government's budget, due by the end of the year, to protect small firms and free them up to drive growth. Alongside retaining the Lifeline Small Business Bonus Scheme, for example, we could deliver targeted support for smaller firms hit hardest by rising energy costs, many of which also had a particularly tough time during COVID. While there's debate about the amount of money that may be available, we could pay for this, or some of it, by repurposing any unspent COVID grant funding. It also makes sense, when everything is so stretched, to pause the implementation of all but the most essential new business regulations, and to fully assess the impact of whatever is in the pipeline. And it's more important than ever that we get as much economic and social value for whatever public money there is to spend by giving local small businesses a fairer crack of the whip in public procurement. One smart move would be to introduce binding targets for increased government spending with micro businesses. We should never underestimate the tenacity and determination of small businesses to beat the odds and stay afloat, but neither should we take it for granted. If certainty isn't realistic, they at least deserve stability as they plot their route to the other side. And that was a Voices piece by Colin Borland, who's Director of Devolved Nations for the Federation of Small Businesses. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 24th of October 2022, from the Voices section, issue of the day, spam, 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 lovely spam. Report by Maureen Sugden. It is a brand of canned cooked pork that first went on sale in the 1930s before going on to become the focus of a Monty Python sketch in later years. Much maligned in recent times, spam is now enjoying a resurgence. But why? Spam. In its dark blue wrapper with spam in yellow capitals above an image of a block of meat, it is an instantly recognisable tin on supermarket shelves around the world. The pre-cooked canned meat is made by US firm Hormel Foods in its home state of Minnesota, introduced back in 1937 with the aim of increasing sales of pork shoulder, a cut of meat that did not sell well. Hormel says that the name was invented after a staff competition, with the brother of a company executive coming up with spam, popular thought to be an abridgment of spiced ham. It's much maligned. It has been over the years, with the fact it was regarded as a low-cost meal, introducing some culinary snobbery into the mix, while wartime soldiers apparently joked it was meat that failed the physical. Then, in the 1990s, amidst the rise of email, its reputation sparked the use of the word spam for unsolicited emails. However, it did find fame with Monty Python in 1970, when the iconic comedy troupe featured a sketch in their Flying Circus series, portraying Vikings singing spam, 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 lovely spam. And in 2006, Hormel Foods even sponsored the Python Spam-A-Lot musical. It had some famous fans. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher once recalled having enjoyed it as a teenager on Boxing Day 1943, describing it as a wartime delicacy, adding, "I can quite vividly remember we opened a tin of spam luncheon meat. We had some lettuce and tomatoes and peaches, so it was spam and salad." And it also has regular fans. More than 100,000 people a year visit the Spam Museum in Austin, Minnesota. And, growing in popularity after the war, it is available around the world, particularly popular in Hawaii and in South Korea, where it was introduced by the US Army during the Korean War when food was hard to come by. And last December, Hormel revealed spam sales had hit a record high for the 7th year in a row, hitting $3.5 billion, £2.65 billion, in the 3 months to the end of October 2021. Now, amid the surge of cost of living crisis, it seems shoppers are turning to the tinned meat even more so than before. Waitrose have announced sales are up by 36%. Anything else? Waitrose's Food and Drink report said the use it all trend and a shift to slow cooking was likely behind rising sales of other products too, such as beef shin, ox cheek and lamb neck, up 23%, 9% and 4% respectively, while fish heads are up an incredible 34% on last year. The cost of living crisis is biting. A poll for Waitrose found that 72% of consumers are now more mindful about their grocery budget, and more than a third are very concerned about how they will cope in the coming months. Some 32% said they looked out for special offers more than ever before. Waitrose Chief Executive James Bailey said, "The events of the last year have created a difficult backdrop for many people and, like all supermarkets, we've had to judge the mood and react. We're seeing some big changes." What about that old snobbery? It's been shunted out of the way by social media, with spam a trending ingredient on TikTok videos. And that comment piece was by Maureen Sugden. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 24th of October 2022, from the Voices section, Doug Marr. The chaos, it's down to the Tory members and voters. We have all said things we'll later regret. The First Minister, for example, would probably like to rewind the use of Tories and detest in the same sentence. Without sounding too much like Donald Trump, I accept unreservedly there are good people who vote Conservative. Nevertheless, I am still puzzled by their thinking and motivation. Despite the quotidian evidence to the contrary, they cling limpet-like to the touching belief that a blue rosette denotes competence and credibility, and Conservative have everyone's best interests at heart. Even after Ms Truss's defenestration, some Tory voters speaking in the evening news regretted she hadn't had time to see her policies through. In recent elections, the rural constituency where I used to live has returned Tory members to both Westminster and Holyrood. Indeed, a member of the local gentry is at MSP. Of course, it's an area where forelock tugging and deference to the local laird is a way of life. It's more difficult, however, to fathom Tory voters in areas that might have been deemed working class. The spectacular collapse of Labour's Red Wall in 2019 was a direct consequence of Brexit. In post-industrial areas such as the North East of England, collective identity and personal esteem had been shaken, leaving people unsure of who they are anymore. Snake oil salesmen filled the vacuum, peddling a fiction based on who people thought they used to be. Windbags spouting vacuous slogans about global Britain, getting Brexit done and taking back control were presented with an open goal. Their task was made easier by Labour's pitiful defence of its heartland. Labour's craven ambivalence towards the EU played into the hands of Messrs Johnson, Rees-Mogg and Farage. Labour's hands are far from clean in the current crisis, firmly rooted in the fantasy of Brexit. Former members like me can scarcely believe Sir Keir Starmer has yet to grasp the basic concept of leadership, i.e. you lead and shape policy and opinion. Man up, Sir Keir. There's more to it than union flags and empty sloganising. Make Brexit work. You cannot be serious. There is, of course, one group of voters more culpable than any others for the chaos and crises of recent months. There are the 160,000 or so Conservative members, particularly the 81,000 who voted for mistrust to get into Downing Street. The party keeps their precise number, demographic and location close to its chest. I'd be willing to bet the majority are domiciled south of Watford. Self-interest attracted them to the junior common politics and economics of mistrust and our erstwhile Chancellor. The bait of tax cuts proved irresistible, especially if future generations were to pick up the tab for the eye-watering national debt. Those 81,000 have a lot to answer for, and share mistrust responsibility for crashing the economy. It's damnable that those whose stupidity cost billions will walk away unscathed. As always, impending austerity will see reduced services and benefits for the most vulnerable. Pensioners, though, will be protected. Many vote Tory, you see. I have the occasional flight of fancy in which I see the most responsible paying the cost of foisting mistrust on us. All action should have consequences, and it could be a form of re-education. Wholesale transportation to an uninhabited island in the South Atlantic might be a tad harsh, but a case can be made for the sequestration of assets, including houses that have exponentially increased in value. The proceeds might only make a small dent in the billions squandered due to the half-witted political dogma, but it would certainly concentrate minds. While we're at it, how about a heavy windfall tax on those who made fortunes shorting sterling? Alternatively, the guilty could make amends by volunteering in hospital and other services on which the heaviest cuts will fall. Alas, it's but a flight of fancy, and the guilty will, as always, walk away. Nevertheless, something can be salvaged from the wreckage. Essentially, the recognition that a self-respecting democracy cannot allow a small, elitist group to impose a totally inadequate Prime Minister on the rest of us. Exclusion of the constituency-based, loony right from the selection process for the next occupant on number 10 is a first step in the right direction. The next must be the validation of that choice through a general election. And that was an opinion piece by Doug Marr.
From the Herald, Tuesday the 25th of October 2022, from the opinion section. The first real test for Sunak, Rees-Mogg and the Brexit Bill. This article is by Brian Wilson. As the Tories struggled towards the latest least worst option, the good news was that Boris Johnson had retreated in abject humiliation. The prince across the water who would have done better to stay where he was on a Dominican beach. The less promising assumption is that to get rid of him, Rishi Sunak has done deals with Johnson's right-wing ultra-Brexiter backers. The facts he can count and is not Liz Truss should not disguise Mr. Sunak's wider policies, which are far from liberal, as his cabinet lineup will surely confirm. There is an early test of whether either sense or moderation have entered Downing Street along with its latest occupant. It comes in the form of the retained EU law (Revocation and Reform) Bill, which has its second reading in the House of Commons today. This may not sound the most attention-seeking piece of legislation, but its potential implications, both practical and ideological, are profound. In summary, it is about the extent to which Brexit will be used to sweep away regulations which carry the historic stamp of EU membership, regardless of their merits. There are real fears that powers conferred by the bill could be used to get rid of workers' rights, environmental protections and public health measures with minimal debate in order to meet an artificial deadline which has been set for the end of next year, all in order to claim a, quotes, Brexit dividend. These questions have been pretty much on hold for the past 4 years, since Theresa May, of relatively blessed memory, decided it prudent not to rush things. So EU-originated regulations were retained on the statute books of both the UK and its devolved administrations. Given the reality of Brexit, there is a rational argument for gradually translating these measures, numbering more than 2,400, into UK law, or, in devolved policy areas, into Scottish law. Those of us who never regarded the EU as a fount of perfection would expect there to be opportunities for improvement, as well as obvious dangers. It all depends whose hands the conversion process is in, and that is where the immediate concern lies. Eleanor Dewes, a lawyer who has helped to draft Mrs. May's approach, describes the current bill as unprecedented, reckless and undemocratic, and completely at odds with her commitment to gradual, considered transitions. This drive for rapid wholesale conversion or abolition began under Johnson and his then crony Lord Frost, who was put in charge of something called the Brexit Opportunities Unit, and the new approach emerged last year as fodder for the Brexit hardliners. The end of 2023 was set as the sunset date for most EU regulations. Since then, the pace has quickened. A House of Commons briefing paper states, "The current bill goes considerably further than was indicated in the December 2021 ministerial statement. It completely overhauls the constitutional architecture, making it easier to revoke, modify or replace through secondary legislation. In other words, any existing regulation that Tory ministers dislike can be wiped out without parliamentary scrutiny or room for opposition." At the time of writing, the Secretary of State in charge of this process is Jacob Rees-Mogg, who slithers from one administration to the next, personifying the worst traits of privileged, arrogant right to rule. He also leads the Brexit whatever the consequences camp, which regards abolishing EU-inspired regulations as an end in itself. This ideological zeal is now driving intense concerns among trade unions, environmental, animal welfare and consumer bodies, to mention but a few. Their fears are well justified. As things stand, an ideological broad brush could sweep away many decent, necessary advantages which have been built during our membership of the EU. The more time runs out on them, the more desperate the likes of Rees-Mogg are to complete this version of a Brexit dividend. This is where Sunak comes in. If he presses ahead with this red meat for the Brexiters approach and leaves Rees-Mogg to administer it, then all the talk about bringing either party or country together will be complete hogwash. Reverting to Mrs. May's approach would send a different signal, and she was, after all, a Tory Prime Minister. Neither is there any need for another tiresome debate about power grabs between Westminster and Holyrood. Where these regulations are within devolved areas of competence, there should be no doubt about responsibility continuing to rest in Edinburgh or Cardiff. That is something Sunak could confirm very quickly. A debate on this at Westminster seemed to focus disproportionately on the case study of chlorinated chicken. If the Tories lift the EU ban, will Scotland's power to buy it from our supermarkets be grabbed away? A minister replied to that specific question, if the Scottish Government want to preserve legislation within their competency, the UK Government will respect it. I think there is clarity on that. This does seem clear-cut, but needs confirming. If we don't want chlorinated chicken, no one will force-feed it us. By extension, there is no power grab, and Holyrood will control those regulations within devolved policy areas. That still leaves us with the same alarms that are sounding throughout the UK in response to the real dangers this bill entails. Let's not be distracted. At the heart of this is the wider question of relations with the EU. The only way to achieve a positive, constructive approach, which is not only common sense but essential to economic growth, is through a change of government. That does not require Brexit to be reversed, and an incoming Labour government would be crazy to get bogged down in that argument, which would inevitably require another referendum. If we were freed of the ultra-Brexit mentality, it would be perfectly possible to reshape the relationship in a constructive way to all-round benefit. On his first day in office, the test for Mr Sunak is whether he will defer to the legitimate concerns this bill has provoked, or if he will leave Rees-Mogg to pursue an ideological agenda in the discredited name of Brexit. If that happens, then nothing will have changed. That article was by Brian Wilson.
And that was this week's The Herald podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes with the publisher's kind permission. Thanks for listening.